It's been a minute since I've done a Ramble style video, so that's what this is going to be. I missed the post-game show earlier today. Eric lagged out, ironically. Normally that's my issue. So it was a light day in terms of content, even though the Blazers lost to the Boston Celtics. So I'm giving you a Ramble video, and I'm going to be talking about the Blazers' potential late lottery pick and the rumblings around them trading it, because there is rumblings that the Blazers are for sure going to trade that pick. And I have some thoughts on A, what they could trade it for, and B, what their mindset should be regarding that pick going into the offseason. This is a little bit of an early offseason video. I'll be doing daily content in the offseason. If you've never watched a Ramble video before, basically I switch up the camera angle and I don't edit it, and in one take I just speak my mind. And it can be a little bit rough. I mess up my words. You know, it's not edited. So it's very natural, okay? That's what Ramble videos are. So I know a lot of you have liked them in the past, so I got you covered in this one. But before we can jump into this Ramble style video, it is brought to you by BetUS. America's favorite sportsbook is BetUS, featuring live betting and racebook. They're celebrating their 30th year anniversary with a historic offer. A 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. You can get started today by using my sign-up link in the description box below, and promo code JOIN125 to activate those first 3 deposit bonuses. You got the NCAA Tournament Championship game tomorrow. Purdue taking on Connecticut. Connecticut 6.5-point favorites. I'm taking UConn on that. They've been phenomenal, even against some pretty big spreads during the NCAA tournament the past couple of years. If you want to get in on this action, remember that link in the top of the description box below. They're also starting to introduce draft-related props on BetUS, such as the draft position for Zach Edey and Edey and Clingan. Clingan's line is set to 9.5. You can get -130 on the under. I would probably go the under right now on that, given his NCAA tournament run, and I think a team will fall in love with his rim protection ability inside the top 9. And then Zach Edey, 20.5. At this point, I would probably go under 20.5, because I think front offices and GMs this year are going to love older prospects, given the uncertainty of some of the younger, high upside guys at the top of this draft. So you can get in on that action over at BetUS. Use the link to sign up in the description box below, and promo code JOIN125 for 3 deposit bonuses of 125%, up to $2,500. Shout out to BetUS. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video. So let's talk about this pick. Right now, the Blazers have the Golden State Warriors lottery pick, essentially. It's 13th right now. Of course, there are play-ins, and Golden State is pretty much locked into the 10th seed. Maybe they could climb up to 9th, but they're probably going to be the 10th seed, which means that that pick is going to be a lottery pick unless the Warriors win 2 play-in games in a row. Now, they've been playing really good basketball as of late, and of course have a championship pedigree, so there is a decent chance that they could win 2 play-in games in a row and make the playoffs. So right now, you know, if things hold serve, the Warriors pick could be 13th, but if they play their way into the playoffs, then it would probably be 16th or 17th in that range. And if the Warriors don't play their way into the playoffs, then there is a legitimate chance that it could move up to 12, because if the 9th or 10th seed in the Eastern Conference plays their way into the playoffs, then basically the Warriors pick would get bumped up from 13 to 12, because you'd have a 7 or an 8 seed in the East moving their way into the lottery, and a team below Golden State in the lottery moving above them. It's a little complicated, but basically, Warriors don't play their way in, it's 12th or 13th. If they play their way in, it's most likely 16th or 17th. For this video, we're just going to assume they don't play their way in, and the Blazers end up with the 13th pick. Now, there's been a lot of talk that the Blazers aren't keeping that pick, and the way it's worded makes it sound like that's a sure thing, which is a little bit worrisome for me, because I do have question marks about this front office's mindset going into what is going to be a pivotal offseason. Now, there is one trade that potentially the Blazers have already decided on that could make some sense, and that is trading for their future picks back. Now, since the Blazers are in a rebuild, we don't really talk about the future first that they owe to the Chicago Bulls, which originated from a trade in which the Blazers got Larry Nance Jr. That trade is getting further and further away. That pick is lottery protected for multiple years. Ever since that trade, the Blazers have been in the lottery for multiple years. We didn't expect it to be this way, but that pick still has not conveyed. And it's lottery protected through, I believe, 2028, which does create some complications down the line, given that the Blazers have the right to swap 2028 first-round picks with the Milwaukee Bucks. But if they don't have their first-round pick that year, if that's the year it finally conveys, then they can't make that swap. And trading future firsts is also complicated, given that you'd be trading first that do back up a protection on the pick that the Blazers currently owe the Chicago Bulls. So Portland, without wanting too many young players potentially on the roster, and considering the fact that they're going to have a higher pick than that, their own first-round pick, as well as 2 early second-round picks, the Blazers could elect to trade that late lottery pick for its own future first back. And you might say, okay, why would the Blazers trade a lottery pick for a pick that only conveys if it's outside the lottery, and even worse? Now, this year's draft class is not as good as other drafts. It could make sense for Portland to do that given its situation right now, and given that potentially the 17th pick in a future draft might be more valuable than the 13th pick in this year's draft. But you could make the case to Chicago that they need an infusion of young talent, and who knows when that pick is going to convey. They may just elect to have a second lottery pick this year and just take the 13th pick and not have to worry about that Blazer pick conveying in the future. That trade would make the most sense from a standpoint of the Blazers having already decided to trade the first round pick that they're getting from the Warriors. Now, of course, if the Warriors are in the lottery, that pick does have a small percentage chance to jump into the top 4. It's very unlikely, but that is a possibility that could derail those plans. But if the Blazers have decided to trade that pick, that is the scenario I'm most comfortable with right now, because it opens up future firsts, and then down the line, you know, if the Blazers still don't make the playoffs, and then 2028 is the year they break out, and Milwaukee sucks, they would have those pick swap rights. There's a lot of little nuance that comes in play here with the Blazers' future first owed to the Chicago Bulls. But other scenarios I am not so comfortable with. There is a feeling around this team that they are going to try and be competitive for a play-in spot next season. Now, we heard the rumor that the Blazers want to be the Houston Rockets next year. That means this year's Houston Rockets, who are above 500, but are the 11th seed. They're not going to make the play-in. The West is pretty stacked in the top 11 this year. And if the Blazers have that mindset, then I am a bit worried, because I don't think the ultimate goal should be to be a play-in team, and I don't think the Blazers should operate with a short-term mentality. When you're rebuilding to ultimately contend. You're not rebuilding to make a play-in game or lose in the first round, right? And that was the problem with the Blazers for multiple years with Damian Lillard, is they were stuck in the middle. They weren't contenders. They weren't bad enough to get high draft picks that could potentially land them stars in order to catapult them into contenders, and they were stuck in that zone of mediocrity. They did have a couple playoff series wins. They did make a Western Conference Finals, but then they got swept by a shorthanded Golden State team. You can easily make the case that the Blazers were never contenders with Damian Lillard, and they didn't have enough assets. They didn't have enough high upside young talent. They didn't have enough of a whole lot of things that could have increased their chances to ultimately get to the point where they were contenders. And my biggest worry about this Blazer rebuild is that they short-circuit it in a way where they don't have enough star power. They don't have a superstar caliber player, but they want to make a play-in. So maybe they trade a late lottery pick like the Golden State Warriors pick for a role player that they believe could help them make the play-in next year, but ultimately doesn't possess any upside. Whereas I know this is a down draft, but late lottery picks have turned into stars in plenty of drafts. The 2013 draft was looked at as similarly bad as this year's, but Giannis Antetokounmpo was taken with the 15th overall pick, right? Even in bad drafts, you got gems in them. The Blazers should be trying to find those gems, because ultimately they need a superstar. I'm not sure if that superstar is on the roster. Hopefully it's Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, but who knows, right? And the Blazers probably shouldn't put all their eggs in the basket of one or both of those guys becoming superstars, because that is a bit optimistic. I like them both as young prospects. However, it's really hard to become a top 10 to 15 player in the world, especially when you're a 6'6", 6'3" guard. It's a little easier if you're an athletic freak like Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? So the Blazers ultimately should not be of the mindset of, let's make a playing game or let's make some noise next season. It would be cool if they did, because young players broke out, and let's say Shaedon Sharpe plays like a star and leads the Blazers to a 10th seed. I'm cool with it happening naturally. However, I am worried, given that rumor about the Blazers wanting to be next year's Houston Rockets, right? What did the Rockets do last offseason? They signed Fred VanVleet to a contract paying him like $40 million a year. They signed Dillon Brooks to a massive contract. And that's with good young wing players and Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore, and Tari Eason can play the 3. Jalen Green, of course, is at the 2. He's been up and down, right? It didn't really make much sense to me. But ultimately, the Blazers, with their lack of viewership this year, apparently down 50 to 60% according to reports. Eric Brandt recently said that it could be down to 70% right now, and if you look at the views on our post-game shows, it would reflect a similar drop in viewership, unfortunately. The front office / ownership group, I do have a worry, is getting sick and tired of empty stadiums in March and April, of nobody caring about the team in March and April, because they're actively trying to lose games because they're rebuilding, and I wonder if they're going to get tired of it enough to actually try and take steps to rectify that and be a competitive team in March and April, where fans are paying attention because, oh, they might be able to make a playing game. Maybe they can even get a home playing game if they get the 9th seed, right? But that is not what the goal should be at all. Spent years stuck in the middle. Don't get stuck in that same position again. That'd be brutal. That'd be brutal. Now, this 13th pick is unlikely to really sway the balance. However, next year's draft looks phenomenal. There's legitimate forwards at the top of the draft. The Blazers, unfortunately, best option probably is to suck again next year. And probably is to hope that they can luck into Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey, or even a guy like Hugo Gonzalez. If you haven't heard of him, he's a Spanish player. He looks phenomenal. He would be the number 1 pick in this year's draft, in my opinion. Getting a guy like that could be huge for the Blazers, could be their superstar, could be their next Damian Lillard, could be guys that fit really well next to Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe. And if Scoot and Sharpe pan out, then all of a sudden maybe you have a big 3 and you have 3 stars and you're a contender because of it. That should probably be the mindset, whereas, you know, avoiding that, trying to get as far away from next year's the top of next year's draft as possible, and trying to get a 9th or a 10th seed, and spending a late lottery pick to get a role player to help the Blazers do that, if they have already made up their mind that that's what they're going to do, that is probably not the right path and probably not the right mindset for them going into the offseason. So when I hear these rumblings that the Blazers have made up their mind and are set on trading the Warriors pick, that is what I worry about. Now, there is another scenario that Eric brings up all the time that I say is not going to happen, but I will talk about it, okay? The Blazers are projected to be well into the tax this offseason despite being a rebuilding team, which is pretty comical considering that they're going to lose 60 games this year. And there are people out there that act like it's going to be easy for them to duck the tax. However, Malcolm Brogdon's still on the roster. Yes, they could trade him, but if they don't trade him to a team with cap space or a $22 million trade exception, I don't even know if any of those exist right now, then the team trading for Malcolm Brogdon is going to have to match salary and trade back something close to that $22 million that the Blazers ultimately are going to bring back onto their books. It's not as simple as trade Malcolm Brogdon and hope you get a first-round pick and then you save his entire contract. It's not that simple. And if the Blazers were a couple $1 million over the tax, that's one thing. But depending on where their pick is this year and where the Warriors' pick is, if they use both picks, they're well into the tax. And Eric's brought up the idea of, maybe they might trade the Warriors' pick attached to Matisse Thybulle in order to duck the tax. I think that would be horrible for them optically, considering they matched Matisse Thybulle last offseason, and I think Eric isn't necessarily, I don't know, I can't speak for Eric, but I don't know how serious he is when he brings that up, because we bring up stuff like what's the worst case scenario all the time, like what's the craziest bad thing the Blazers front office could do. We've done so ever since the terrible Norm Powell, Robert Covington trade. We've always tried to think about what is the worst thing they could possibly do. That would be it. You know, attaching a pick like that to dump a salary so they can duck the tax would be pretty bad. But, I mean, I guess you can't completely rule it out because this ownership group doesn't want to pay the tax. They've proven that when they're trying to win. And right now they're rebuilding. So how they're going to duck the tax is a really interesting storyline this offseason. Maybe it's something like this 13th pick with a Matisse Thybulle and they get back a future first so they can justify it. I don't really know. But if you go from matching Matisse Thybulle's contract to attaching an asset to get rid of it one summer later, that looks really, really bad. And I don't think this front office ownership group optically would go for that. I don't think there's a legitimate chance of that happening at all. But that is the doomsday scenario. Now, the other scenario I guess we can talk about is what if the Blazers attach it to other young assets to trade for a star? I just don't think that's a realistic path. I don't think there's going to be really any stars traded this offseason that would make sense for the Blazers. I think the closest you'll get is like Zach LaVine or DeJounte Murray, and both those guys are guards. So that's not really on the table. Maybe there's a trade where the Magic flame out in the first round and they want a young scoring guard, and maybe they don't view Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero as great fits for each other, and they're willing to move off Franz Wagner for like Anthony Simons and the 13th pick. That would interest me. If the Blazers could pull off some sort of a trade like that, then okay, cool, I'm happy with that. But that is very far-fetched. I don't think Franz Wagner gets moved, and if that's the Blazers' plan for trading this pick, it is not a plan that should be a plan A because of how unlikely it is to happen, right? Obviously, the Blazers should make the phone call to Orlando and see what they're willing to do and see if Franz Wagner is potentially available, gouge their interest for a guy like Anthony Simons, who would make a lot of sense because he's from the Orlando area and that's the type of guard Orlando needs. So obviously you make exploratory calls if you're Joe Cronin, but a trade for that caliber of forward is unlikely. There's a reason why teams don't want to trade forwards like that, and that's because they're harder to get than scoring guards. And that was the Blazers' problem for years, is they couldn't get that type of forward. So I don't see Orlando trading a guy like Franz Wagner, who was taken with the 8th pick. You know, I mean, the Blazers, if anything, should be seeing if they can trade up from 13 to get a second top 8 pick, like the Magic had a couple years ago when they took Jalen Suggs, who is phenomenal defensively, really good role player, really big part of that team, and then Franz Wagner at 8. You know, maybe that's Cody Williams sitting there at 8. If the Blazers could get, you know, a combination like an Alex Sarr and Cody Williams, you're probably cooking with something. Maybe Ron Holland is there, and he could be a lockdown defender. And if he ever learns how to shoot, I think he has true, legitimate star potential. That's the type of swings the Blazers should be taking with that Warriors pick, not trading it for a role player. But who knows? That's why this offseason is intriguing. There's multiple storylines surrounding this Blazers team. How do they duck the tax? What do they do with that Warriors pick? Of course, where does their own pick end up? And then who do they take with their own pick? Lots of fun, intriguing storylines to follow this offseason. And we're going to have you covered right here at Blazers Uprise with daily uploads all offseason long. I'm already working my ass off to get ahead on those and produce those. We're going to have player reviews. I'll talk about more once we get there, though. There's still a week left in the NBA season. So we'll have post-game shows. We can answer your questions and all of that. And that's going to wrap up this Ramble video. Let me know what you think of this conversational topic down in the comment section below. What do you think the Blazers should do with the Warriors pick? What do you think their mindset should be going into the offseason? Really curious to hear your thoughts on that. And once again, shout out to BetUS. Use promo code JOIN125 for 125% deposit bonuses on your first 3 deposits. The sign-up link is in the description box below, and using it helps out the channel, so I appreciate that. National championship game tomorrow. Let me know who you got. And with that being said, that's a wrap for this Ramble video. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'm out of here until next time. As always, peace out. Go Blazers.